Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of TI Talks. I'm Ricki, and I'm joined today by our editor at Tech Inform, James Pierce.
Hi, Ricki. How are you doing?
So we will be joined later on by award-nominated and best-selling author Kelly Vero, who has 30 years of experience working in the Metaverse, in gaming, and also in NFTs, blockchain, and crypto. And she'll be joining us later to discuss the Metaverse and security in the Metaverse. Who is in charge? But before that, James and I are going to be discussing some news from the previous week, namely OpenAI collaborating with Apple to launch Apple Intelligence. James, can you tell us a bit more about what's going on there?
Yeah, so this was announced at Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, where you quite often get an insight into what Apple has coming up in the market. The thing is, as we all know, AI has been the big tech topic for the last 2 years, but Microsoft, Google, Amazon, we'd seen all of their kind of approaches and their plans and their plays in it, but one name was missing, and that was Apple. So there'd been a lot of rumors that Apple were working on their own AI in the background, but lo and behold, when CEO Tim Cook stood on the stage to announce what they're going to be doing in the coming months, he revealed Apple Intelligence, which is actually going to be reliant on ChatGPT, so a relationship with OpenAI that'll see some ChatGPT functionality put onto iPhones, iPads, Macs, basically Apple's range of devices. It'll integrate with Siri, so if you ask questions and Siri can't answer, then it'll be able to push some of that functionality off onto ChatGPT. There's also going to be kind of image creation functionality and functions that'll help you with working as well. So basically bringing a lot of the stuff that we've already seen in AI, but putting it there on your iPhone directly for users to have access to.
Okay, cool. I guess the question I'm wondering as well is, like, in your opinion, at least, like, do we need Gen AI in our phones? Don't they do enough already?
Well, you can use Gen AI on your phone. Funnily enough, they're not the first to get there. Google recently launched Gemini, their AI, launched a mobile device side of that for Android. So you can use Gemini on your phone. As to kind of how it works, if you remember a few years ago when Siri launched or when Alexa launched, everyone got really excited because there was this idea that you could just speak to a device and it would give you answers, or it would have a kind of personality. And chatbots became a thing, and people do still use them, but I think less frequently. It's more of a party joke to shout Alexa to change a song or something like that. I think they're less kind of commonly used, but they're still there. Now imagine you put in an actual intelligence behind that, one that can learn and really develop. You then have it not just answering your first question, but also because it's learned your approach when you're looking for information, it might answer a bunch of questions. Or it might learn that if you ask a question or you ask to do something, you then follow it up with another functionality. For example, if you're cooking, say you look for a recipe, it might then learn to bring up your timer on your phone so that you can time things when you're putting them in the oven and stuff like that. So there's a lot of kind of potential use cases, I think, that AI can do that we think that Siri and other chatbots were doing, but they weren't really doing. They go a lot further and they're a lot smarter.
I'm getting kind of like flashes of the scenes from WALL-E, the Disney Pixar movie, where everyone's just in these chairs and doesn't need to move because like the screens do everything for them. Hopefully,
favorite Pixar film, just to point out, but
because they're all just sitting in chairs not doing anything.
No, because it's a beautiful love story between two robots. And it's the first half of it is a silent movie. The second half with the humans is the worst bit of it.
What do you think this means for OpenAI as a business going forward? What does this collaboration mean for them?
Android devices are the most popular devices in the world in general, but if you go to big markets and developed markets like the US and the UK, iPhone still has a massive presence. And by that nature alone, you're getting your software put onto some of the most popular phones in the world, where users are really loyal and committed as well. I would expect a massive spike in the usage of ChatGPT simply because it's there on the phone. And Apple are very good at pushing this kind of functionality as well to encourage their users to access it and to see the most out of it. So for OpenAI, it's getting their software into the hands of a massive amount of people.
Is Apple playing catch up, do you think?
No, because I think they're coming at it from a slightly different point of view. I think the thing is with Apple, they are very focused on that kind of end user experience more so than any other company. And they do that really, really well. It's the reason that people still say to this day, use an iPhone because it's just so easy to use. It's because they've made it their version of an experience is the basics of it. You can just pick it up and use it. Anyone can pick it up and use it. I think in that regard, their approach, they are happy to take their time to make sure they get the right approach when they enter a market. And they're not normally first to a market either. People think Apple invented the smartphone. They didn't. There were smartphones and touchscreen smartphones for years before Apple came out. They didn't invent the first tablet. There was Palm tablets years before. There were tablets on Star Trek in the 60s. But they come into the market when they're ready to and try and shake it up by doing a better experience. And I think this is another example of that.
Somebody who is not very impressed by this collaboration is our friend Elon Musk. He has some concerns over the privacy and security of integrating OpenAI into iPhones. So much so that he has posted about banning iPhones from his companies if ChatGPT is integrated into iPhones. His opinions aside, do you think that there is any legitimate concerns there about privacy and security?
I think there's a lot to be asked about the relationship between ChatGPT and iOS when it's integrated. Apple has said that a lot of the processing for it will be done on the smartphone, but obviously it's still going to be sending some information to ChatGPT servers. So if you're sending data that belongs to a person, your data agreement is with your handset provider, then, there becomes a big question as to what data ChatGPT are accessing and how they're using that data themselves. And Apple have always been very keen to stress that they protect privacy in a way that their rivals don't. That's their claim. Apple claim much of the processing will be done on the device itself, and they say that's why their version of ChatGPT will be particularly special because it's being processed locally. They've developed the software in partnership with iOS so that it can function in a way that protects people's data. For their part, OpenAI have said that they won't keep any data sets. The data will be removed once the question or process has been completed. But as ever with data privacy, we don't really know what's going on underneath the hood. People will no doubt investigate it and find out. Elon Musk's worries, I'm sure he has legitimate worries. He's also not best friends with OpenAI, even though he was one of their founders. He is, recently been locked in a court case with them, but he's basically accused them of moving away from their original founding principles. And he's been quite critical of Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. So I do take his criticism with a pinch of salt, given that he's not known for loving either of the other companies involved and has his own reasons. And he also has his own AI as well, Grok, which operates on X, and then also XAI, which is his own AI company, which is competing directly with OpenAI. So you just have to be careful as to what you're saying. But we should always try to look to see how our data is being used when there's these kind of relationships.
So aside from the announcement of Apple Intelligence, were there any other big announcements at the Worldwide Developer Conference?
Yes, I mentioned Apple Vision Pro earlier. That is their headset solution where VR, AR, kind of spatial computing. It went on sale earlier this year in the US. Quite expensive, I think, but it's seen as their big play into that kind of metaverse piece. So they announced that that's going to be launching in a bunch of new countries, including China, Japan, Australia, and the big European countries. I think it's £3,500 roughly that it's being sold for. So if you've saved up your pennies, then there's an opportunity to kind of do that and go and experience Apple's version of the metaverse.
Speaking of the metaverse, we are now about to be joined by a very special guest. And a very, very busy woman by the sounds of it. Self-professed creative badass who loves to talk. Kelly Vero has 30 years working in the games industry under her belt, as well as 10 years in blockchain, NFT, and crypto. but more importantly, is actively developing the metaverse for clients worldwide, which is why she's joining us today to discuss security in the metaverse. Whose job is it? Kelly, welcome to TI Talks.
Thanks so much for having me.
Maybe you can just give us the 1 minute pitch as to your background and relationship with the metaverse, because obviously we're at a point where, the metaverse has been talked about for a while. It's maybe slipped back behind AI as the topic on tech people's lips, but we're still seeing some growth there. It's just maybe not the big topic that everyone's talking about. But talk about your kind of background, your relationship with it for us.
My background, I guess, is that I worked for many, many years in the games industry, and that's kind of the sort of ancestry, really, of the modern metaverse that we think of today. Because when I was working on games such as Tomb Raider, Halo, Subway Surfers, all of us collectively as designers and developers were thinking about how do we create a living thing out of this? How do we create a persistent space? And I think that persistence didn't really come into being. Okay, we've played games like Sierra Online, etc., from back in the 80s, but I don't think the real being of the metaverse sort of came into its own for quite some time, probably until around sort of Second Life. And then I think with Second Life, we all saw this as a novelty that we could, and Canova, we saw these as novelties that we could start to do things like land parcels, real estate, and really look at it as an economy and a place to do business, and not necessarily as a piece of fun and a place to play. And I think the convergence point was probably COVID and the pandemic, because that gave us an opportunity to be online and also do all of that economic stuff that we found like super exciting during the days of Canova, Second Life, etc. And now I think today, yes, it has dropped off a bit in favour of AI, but I think it's still very much in areas outside of Western territories. It's very, very popular. It's still a place that people do a lot of business. It is a place where, businesses are onboarded. For example, Julie Sweet a few years ago issued everybody with VR to ensure that they could onboard effectively with their entire team, regardless whether they were in Sao Paulo or Shanghai. And I think these are really great, important ways to bring people together. Using this metaverse as a term, obviously it's become quite a dirty word over the last few years because it's associated with things like blockchain, shilling, NFTs, all that kind of stuff. The blockchain part of it, I think, is super exciting because it gives us really nice layered framework in order for us to do those economic things that we talked about and dreamt about. And certainly looking forward and going back as a designer and developer, it's a place where we feel like we've come home as game players and dreamers.
Something you said there is quite interesting, that it's became a bit of a dirty word. And I think one of the kind of things that has driven that possibly is that we've been pitched a certain type of metaverse. Obviously, Facebook, when they rebranded, tried to capture that identity and position themselves as the leader in the metaverse space. But actually, if you look at what some of the more exciting things are going on, it's in the gaming market, like Fortnite, when they started throwing real life concerts within Fortnite where people could, just follow their favorite artists around the map and actually kind of interact with it, which is much more, in my opinion anyway, an exciting way of kind of having an interactive experience, which is what the metaverse is supposed to be. So when it comes to that kind of leap from the gaming sector and those experiences into what businesses could do, what are the big trends that you're seeing that are kind of coming from that gaming background and that are influencing businesses in the metaverse?
Well, I think one of the kind of big things to look out for in the next couple of years especially is that symbiotic nature between business and entertainment, and that convergence point will be in the metaverse. So if you want to buy your groceries and you don't want to break the fiction of playing Fortnite, you're going to get the opportunity to be able to do that very, very soon, through things like overlays and spike timers and all that kind of good stuff, which will be obviously AI generated. So all these things are definitely coming together. But I would expect to see quite a lot of e-commerce coming away from web, and we start to use the metaverse, which is what we'll talk about today, a bit more like it's a 3D internet.
As we adapt and move more of our web traffic onto the metaverse, whatever form it comes in, it raises a lot of challenges as well, as to who kind of manages that traffic and who controls it. I come from a telco background, so looking at that space is always really interesting for me. But also the security element and who is responsible for looking after it, and especially if you're doing more transactions and stuff online. So who put the question straightforward there, who in your mind should be responsible for protecting the metaverse?
I think we have to ask that question from two kind of perspectives. First of all, obviously, who watches the Watchmen, right? Because all of these big tech giants are all vying for top position in this type of persistent space. Meta, obviously, a couple of years ago, were the market leader, but they've kind of messed up along the way because they've made some silly sort of life choices, I think. But who's watching them? Well, we do know, don't we, that federal government bodies are trying to regulate what happens in terms of data points that are coming out of both the metaverse and gaming in those, using that as a kind of portal. So COPPA is a really good example of protecting children online. And we think that because we're going to have this sort of open framework that all that's going to be forgotten. Wrong. It won't be forgotten. I don't know if anybody remembers that far back. You know, you folks are super young, but you used to go onto like dodgy websites back in the late 90s and you get some kind of FBI sort of pop-up that say, you're being watched by the FBI and we've got to pay us like $25,000, you know, to get unlocked from using the internet. Well, you know, we're going to go through the same sort of pattern, but I think before we were totally naive about this space and it really was the Wild West. Now we're a little bit canny and savvy towards who really is watching the Watchmen. We should have those report buttons. We must be, if we can report players in League of Legends, we've got to be able to report users. We're still going to have moderators. There are still people roaming around Horizon workrooms that, you know, are trying to moderate content. And so that's one side of it. And then the other perspective is, well, if it is an open space, then we should all be governing ourselves. That's cool. I can definitely see that there is going to be a lot of space for decentralized autonomous organizations. And those DAOs, I guess you saw the Animoca Brands big DAO announcement about Sandbox over the course of the past couple of weeks. You know, Yatsu has not been able to stop speaking about DAO and how important it is. And I think that is very much a part of the direction of travel that we're going. The big problem that we have in order to bring these two things together and make them work harmoniously is governments. And I think they've kind of got to, you know, move with the times a little bit. And we've got to kind of stop governments or the rule of law being decided by 90-year-old people that are wearing diapers. We've just got to get into a position where young people, you know, or people at least have the authority to be able to make these claims and help these decisions do that, because the future doesn't belong to these old farts. It belongs to the young people, right?
Well, that's one of the challenges, I guess, is that there's two bits to that. Firstly, you likened the Web 1 and Web 2 to the Wild West, which very much I can see that. The whole thing with the Wild West, that frontier of kind of unexplored lands and people learning as they go, didn't have the governments to kind of impact it. And now we're starting to see that regulation come in and people trying to put some controls in there. For businesses, that can be important. It can be beneficial to have some level of regulation. The thing we all love about the Wild West, if you go play Red Dead Redemption, is that you can go around shooting anyone. You can't do that in the real world, and you don't want to be able to do that in the real world, and you don't want to do that in the metaverse, metaphorically. So how can that balance be struck between making sure there is sufficient regulation to keep everyone safe, but also making sure that it's decentralized and the internet's kept free, I guess?
Well, we've got to have that symbiotic relationship that I talked about, for sure. But I think also we've got to be, you know, mindful of our own actions and activities. That's a very optimistic and naive way of saying just behave yourself when you're online. You should know that by now. But also there hasn't been enough reporting mechanisms until recent times. It's about, 18 months ago since that entire thing blew up in the face of Epic and Fortnite over not effectively reporting in Fortnite. Now, the problem there, of course, is that that's a walled garden. That isn't actually an open network. That's really just a bunch of servers all talking to one another, but it's protected and it's encased by Epic. When we let these things out, we let these things go, we start to look at the challenges that AI is having currently, which is, again, who watches the Watchmen? Who's policing all of this stuff? And I think it really is as simple as sort of saying, we need to make sure that there are opportunities for us to report. And now how that reporting responds, either through decentralized autonomous organizations or a rigorous audit paper trail through federal or government bodies, depends upon the individuals that want to be involved in that movement. I certainly believe that looking at some of the things that Yatsu has said about Sandbox and Animoca brands, that might be the direction of travel. The initial reporting stage will happen in a kind of walled garden, decentralized autonomous zone. And then I think that audit paper trail will go up through various governmental departments, obviously, that look after their own country's regulation. And that would work.
I definitely think you're right onto something. I think another interesting thing you mentioned was the generational relationship. We're quite often, when we talk about regulation for internet and Web3, there's quite often a shout about, oh, you need to protect the kids. But actually, the newer generations are better on computers than we are. Once you give them the right skill set or help them develop the right skill set, they're going to go much further, faster, and more inventive than we probably ever will. How much of that kind of power should we try and place in their hands as they're coming up through the ranks? And what approach should businesses take to making sure their young and incoming staff bases are empowered enough to be willing to kind of bring the metaverse with them?
Well, they're going to bring the metaverse with them anyway, whether we want them to or not. I mean, our generation, I'm talking about my generation, not yours. You're just millennials. So you're fine right now. But my kind of generation, Gen X, we're the idiots here. And the boomers are the idiots. We're the old duffers that need to kind of step off the mortal coil and leave that stuff alone. And I think that they're going to bring the metaverse with them in any form anyway. They're already sort of connecting and interconnecting different device technologies and, different porting opportunities, either through cloud gaming or through device technology, without even asking for permission anyway. So I can't actually see that in the future they're going to sort of say, is it okay if... I think we just need to give them some guardrails and go, look, this is how we messed up in Web 1 and Web 2. Don't make these stupid mistakes. Use your brains and let's move kind of into a Web 3, Web 4 plus. Some people are talking about Web 5, but they're complete idiots. Into a place where we can see a future that is completely governed by those people.
Our audience is kind of tech leaders who are thinking of how to transform their businesses. Are there any kind of examples, case studies that you've seen recently where you've kind of gone, wow, from a business point of view, that just makes so much sense. That is such the right direction for this to go. Because I still feel like sometimes we get the odd case study where like, oh, that's cool. We get things that tie into like digital twins, linked to VR and stuff, which can be really cool. And yeah, they're great. But I still feel like that killer app, that killer use case, especially for enterprises, is missing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sort of blow my own horn, but that's exactly the type of stuff that I'm working on at the moment. So I'm going to have to send the boys round if you want more information. And you're going to have to sign a cast iron NDA. But I do think the way that we handle ERP, CRM, enterprise systems generally and SaaS platforms is very fragmented. It's incredibly sloppy now and looks dated. It's a bit like when Stewie went into the multiverse and then parts of his body start dropping off in Family Guy. That's how I see a lot of these enterprise tools now. So I think we need to streamline a lot of the tools that we have to make us more productive. After all, during COVID, we were at our most and least productive. So from the perspective of the games industry, we were on a high because we were super productive. But for the rest of the world in enterprise, very, very low in terms of production because people were slow. And we need to cross that chasm real quick. And I think having too many different devices, like a goddamn AI pin, for heaven's sake, is not going to help us to cross that chasm. We've got to look at things from an accessibility and inclusivity perspective as well. We can't assume that everyone's got mega books. So we need to find and make choices that suit our ability to be able to get from point A to point B quickly and affordably.
Thank you so much for your input today, Kelly. It's really appreciated.
I had a great time. It was really good. Let's do it again.
James, how do you think that went?
Yeah, I think Kelly's got such a vast array of experience and working both on the B2B side of things, and then also kind of experience in gaming, gives a really different showcase of what the metaverse is. And that's the bit that always excites me, is actually the metaverse brings in all of these things. You know, I know you and I are both like to play the occasional video game, Ricki, and it brings in that kind of immersiveness that you get from playing games into the business world. Although we probably won't run our businesses like we're in Fortnite, because that could be really, really disastrous.
Well, I really hope not, because I suffer from motion sickness, and that means I'd only be able to work for 20 minutes a day, and that's not helpful to anyone.
And that's about what you do anyway, right?
Do you know what? I stepped that up. That was my own fault. That was an own goal. On that note, thank you everybody for watching today. And I've been Ricki. He's been James. Thank you for watching this episode of TO Talks, and we'll see you again soon.